Hey folks, welcome to Snowpal's Software Development and Architecture Podcast. We have a very special guest with us today. We have Serkan Durusoy, who's a generalist engineering leader, mentor, and facilitator for 20 plus years. Serkan builds engineering teams, coaches developers, grooms leaders, and ships products. He's currently the head of engineering at Okra, an African open finance data and payments provider. Serkan, it's great to have you here.
It is great to be here, and this is the first time I'm hearing someone read that out loud for me. Now that I'm hearing it, I think I'm gonna have to go something a little bit more modest. So yeah.
No, that is very modest. I've actually had the pleasure of working with you, Serkan. So anything you might even be able to say about yourself is going to be modest by a distance. So
Oh, thank you. That's so
no
kind.
worries about
Yeah.
that. This
Uh,
is awesome. Again, thank you for taking the time. We're going to get right into the conversation. And folks, uh, I asked Serkan just before we hit record if I should socialize the topic. We discussed a few topics, and I was like, Serkan, do you want me to tell you what the topic is? And Serkan's like, you know what, that's all right. Just let's roll, and then you can pick the topic. So much as the audience may or may not know what the topic is, they actually might because I want to put the title on the podcast. But Serkan doesn't know, which is great. It's going to be quite conversational, and we're going to have a good time. I'm certainly going to have a great time. So, for starters, right, Serkan, I know you live and work off of a sailboat.
oh
Uh,
yes, I
I
do.
think it's
Yes.
it's as good a time as good a point as any to start a conversation because I don't know anybody else personally who actually can claim that, and I'm quite certain a lot of the audience, the folks who are watching this, not everybody knows somebody who does it as well. So, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? About I'm going to spill the beans about Turkey, where you live. You're born and raised in
Okay.
Turkey,
Yeah.
and the sailboat. A little bit so the audience knows who Serkan is.
All right. Well, thank you. Well, I've been born in 1977, which seems like a really distant past right now. Though I feel like 17, I don't know. We should ask my therapist about that. Well, I've been kind of in and out and around the sea and software for as long as I can remember. I mean, I got my first computer when I was 10 years old. That's probably around the same time I was kind of rowing on a small boat. So I think those two things more or less went hand in hand my entire life. Although I have been a liveaboard sailor while coding and working for my engineering job for probably the roughly the last 10 years now. Um, I've started my career as like an entrepreneur, a co-founder with a software startup. At the time, out of college, we didn't have a company I thought I could work for with the particular challenges, with the particular technologies I wanted to work on. So I say, you know what, maybe I should start one. Horrible decision, by the way. Anybody needs to have a sense of business first before starting a business. That actually indeed went well. Like it
No,
lasted more. Yeah, go ahead, please. Yeah, you
no,
want to ask
Serkan, sorry,
something?
I was going to interrupt you because I'm going to get into some of these other items. But
Ah,
just
okay.
if it's all right, just to set the foundation for the
Mm-hmm.
conversation, a little bit about here. Let me ask a different
Uh-huh.
question. Actually, I want to start with this question, but I kind of forgot because this is a new question I'm starting out with. One of the
Mm-hmm.
questions asking my guest, what is your favorite food? If you can tell us what your most
Ah,
favorite food is and why it is your favorite food.
okay. It's a Turkish dish called named kısır. It's a bulgur salad. Like bulgur is cracked wheat.
Can you
It's
spell
it's
it for
it's
us, please, Serkan? Do you
yes,
mind spelling the
it's
name of the dish?
yeah, of course. Kisir. Kısır, right?
Okay, please go ahead.
Okay, yeah. And I really love the taste, not only because it's a mix of so many flavors, but it's a labor of love to make that dish. Like you could put as much as 20, 30, 50 ingredients on it. I mean, you combine primarily bulgur, the finely cracked wheat, with lots of herbs, veggies, greens, reds, I don't know, like spices, dried, fresh, and then you combine all of that with like olive oil, extracts, like say pomegranate extract, lemon. I mean, so many things. And then when all of that gets combined, then it's an explosion of flavor in your mouth, and I cannot have enough of it. In fact, when I cook one myself, I usually cook for like 20 people at least, because I know people are going to be around to get a taste of that, and
I,
they never surprise me.
and if I were there, I wouldn't, hesitate to barge in to grab that. But let me ask you, is that vegetarian?
Yeah, it actually is vegetarian. Yeah, it is.
Oh,
It's
okay.
indeed an amazing veggie. Yeah, it's an amazing vegetarian
Oh,
dish. Yeah.
lovely. I asked because
Mhm.
I'm, it's a selfish question. I'm
Mhm.
vegetarian, so I was
Mhm.
just making sure I can eat. That sounds
Oh.
really, that sounds really, really good. This
Mhm.
is awesome. So we start there. So it's a Turkish dish,
Mhm.
and is it a breakfast item, lunch, dinner? When do you eat that?
Okay, so it's typically not served as part of a main course, although I like it as a main course, and I prefer it for lunch. It would be too flavorful for a typical Turkish breakfast, which is an entirely different story. I mean, we can talk about Turkish breakfast for an entire episode, if you will. But this dish is particularly known for an afternoon snack, coupled with many smaller things like cake, bakeries, yeah, I don't know, like many different vegetarian dishes that more or less taste like tapas, a version of
Okay.
we call them mezes. And this particular dish is usually one of the key main attractions because
Oh, you know
in the
what? Now I
okra
think
dish.
I can. Sorry, I
Yeah.
didn't mean to interrupt you, but you say meze because I buy a salad from a store nearby. Maybe because that's
Oh,
MEZZE, right? Is that
yes,
MEZ?
yes, MEZE, and then you'll definitely
Okay.
find it there. Then you'll definitely find it there. Like it's a staple meze dish for Turkish cuisine.
Oh, lovely, right? Uh, you know, this seems very exotic. Even the conversation of how you explained
Uh,
a dish. You looks like you can cook. You live on a boat, a beautiful
mhm,
country, a lovely part of the country, as well as I
uh,
know you've told me before on the
mhm,
coast on a boat. I love engineering. I know you do too.
mhm.
But you know, for somebody who lives in a boat, if I were stereotypical, has wonderful sunshine, lovely waters, it's super
No.
exotic. Why
Mm,
do something as dry as it's a devil's advocate-ish kind of question, but why do something as dry as engineering? If you could tell us,
mm.
speak a bit to your engineering interests.
Okay, so first things first, it is like this time of the year where I live, it's quite rainy and cloudy and even depressing at times. So it's definitely far from that idyllic image that you had in your mind. Although most of the year it's exactly like that. I'm not gonna sugarcoat it. It is amazing. Like in between two meetings, I could easily take a dip in the salt water and then come back, freshen up under the sun, and then go back to my work. But with regards to engineering, I think that is exciting because engineering gets you to create. And I think creating something, building something, and seeing how it's used by other people to create other things is it's incomparable to anything else. There are actually a lot of parallels with sailing, being on a boat, and engineering. Like a boat has so many systems, so you kind of have to be handy with tools. You have to understand nature, be in tune with circumstances that are far beyond your control. You have to figure out solutions. You have to find the sweet spot between weather, sea state, the distance you're gonna cover, boat's condition, and so many constraints to have a journey, right? And I think engineering, especially software engineering, is quite similar to that. There are so many constraints. In fact, one might just as well say engineering is the practice of managing constraints, right? So
Absolutely.
I love engineering too as my practice. In fact, it's my childhood passion. I'm formally an engineer for the past roughly 25 years as of my graduation from college. But I've been coding since I was 10. I mean, I fell in love with it the moment I got my first computer. And interestingly, my parents forgot to buy me games. So all I had was a programming book and a computer with 48 kilobytes of memory. So I don't know. I guess my future was kind of more or less set for me. Yeah.
you know, hearing you say some of those things, it resonates very well with me. And here is what I'll tell you why. It just looks like I'm hearing myself speak, just a better looking version of
Oh,
myself, if you will, right? Just
all right.
so. Uh, I always try to associate coding engineering with art, maybe for a couple of reasons. One is because I've told people I've loved to have had other artistic skills to some extent,
Mhm,
being able to cook, being able to draw, being able to paint, being able to play an instrument. I can't boast of any of those skills, and when you cannot do it, you try to make what you do behave, or exhibit itself a lot more like art, just to pretend like you're an artist. But I truly think coding is also an art, because there is beauty in lines of code that you write. Even if the machine is what interprets it, executes it, compiles it, humans also read it to maintain, manage, improve, and comment upon it, right? So there is an element of art, at least the way I see it. So I did
mhm,
a podcast not too long ago where I compared coding to art, and when you mentioned engineering is much like sailing, I think it's great, because I'd love the examples, when we take parallel examples, because I talk to my mom all the time. She's very smart, but she's not an engineer. So whatever
mhm,
it is that I do when I have these conversations, I have to kind of make it, bring out parallel examples so she can associate with those examples, right?
mhm,
So I take food. Food is something she understands, like cooking, all of those things. So I bring everything, compared to food. Look, right now we are working on APIs. We keep publishing APIs on a regular basis at Snowpal. And I tried to explain to my mom the other day what an API is. And believe it or not,
mhm.
after a 30-minute explanation, she was spot on. Like she wouldn't know how to do it, but she was like, yeah, I understand where this
It's
fits into the
impressive.
big picture, right? So I think it helps. So you took sailing, and I'm going to keep going back to that.
Mhm,
The fact that you live in another part of the world, a brilliantly beautiful part of the world, but another part of the world, and have different experiences, but ultimately the two of us are engineers at heart, and I know that.
mhm,
But how we approach a problem, I want to believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, is shaped by a lot of things, right? How our upbringing is, how we grew up, our environment, the social setting, where you're located. So let's say Krish and Serkan are two developers. Let me call you a developer, even though
mhm,
you're leading a large engineering team. But at the core of it, a lot of us are developers, right?
mhm,
Is there a difference, Serkan, because of where somebody is located, what they're looking at when they open the window, what they're eating, and what they're subject to? Are these factors that play any role in how we approach an engineering problem? Or
mhm,
is it a moot point? It doesn't make a difference. Engineering is engineering. Doesn't matter where you live, what you eat, what you do, how all of those things. Can they not make any difference? Like, what's your take on it?
mhm. Well, that's a really tough question, Krish. I think, and the answers might even be divisive, and rightfully so. I mean, there's a lot of value in the human mind. There's a lot of potential in the human mind that just waits to be unlocked, right? And thinking of the early humans just laying back at night, looking at the stars and deducting math from just looking at stars, right? Uh, who's to say one's upbringing or where they've been born or what they've been exposed to has anything to do in terms of limiting their potential to be amazing engineers? That also said, there's a lot of leverage that one can get from their upbringing, who, who their parents are, what they think about empowering their kids, where they live, what kind of problems, what kind of people, what kind of people leading by example that they are exposed to, right? And for instance, yeah, I was one of the more privileged people living in my country because of how my parents emphasized the value of learning and growing and experimenting and trying things. learning from them. But I also was so lucky that one of my teachers early on, second grade, was this person who took a chance on me and, kind of took a particular interest to help guide me in my early days of education. And that changed my life. Um, Living where I live, being exposed to emerging things like technologies of the time, like phone, for instance, like a TV. Those things, they may seem to be too far of a history for a lot of people right now. And it's not. It's just merely a couple decades ago. They allowed me to to experience types and levels of problems that helped me kind of be better prepared for the larger problems that I'm solving today. Right? I kind of started from a few levels up because of that exposure. So yes, as much as human mind has an amazing potential and can find so many interesting problems to solve right in the middle of a desert, which probably comes with a host of problems. Uh, be where you're born, how you've been raised, who you've been, growing together. They, I think, do play a big role in how one can become, the best version of whatever they want to become.
Beautifully said, right? Let me get deeper into that question. Now, we are approaching an engineering problem. Let's say we're building a new API as two people, right? I'm
Mm-hmm.
going to take very
Mm-hmm.
specific, reasonably specific examples. They're not
Mm-hmm.
entirely manufactured simply because I'm just going with examples that I'm currently working on. For instance, that's no bad, right? Let's say we're working on an API. We design. We are Serkan and Krish are the two people who are going to be designing this API, and without getting the details of it because it's completely manufactured at an example level.
Mm-hmm.
If the two of us did it independently, we would do it a certain way. If the two of us did it collaboratively, we are bound to do it slightly differently. So now, a lot of that is surely going to be shaped by our experience, where we come from, what we've done in the past, and so on and so forth. Yet, when it comes to engineering, when you put that down on paper, represent that as code, it is expected to look very monolithic, if you know what I mean. I'm not talking about
Mm-hmm.
monolithic microservices, not in that context, but what I mean by monolithic
Mm-hmm.
here is when your code is being reviewed, when your design is being reviewed, when it is expected to be reviewed without context to who wrote this, who designed it, who implemented it, right? And that's the right way
Mm-hmm.
of doing it. Yet there
Mm-hmm.
are going to be differences. I'm trying to think of examples, but I've seen significant differences in approaches based on who did it, where they're probably even located, what their background is, whether they start out as engineers, whether they start out as product managers, whether they came in from a different industry into software engineering. So there's a lot of variety that comes into the problem solving. Yet when the problem is actually solved, we try to normalize it because machines do expect that level of normalization. Hopefully,
Mm-hmm.
this is a very generic question. I'm trying to get into an aspect of this, but tell me if this doesn't make sense and I can rephrase it. But if it does make sense, uh, how do we enjoy the benefits of these differences so we understand why this problem is being solved differently, or is there value in understanding the differences even though it's a design engineering problem? Or the other approach is, you know what, I don't care, where Sarkan grew up. I don't care where Krish grew up, what their upbringing is, what their backgrounds are. When it comes to solving an engineering problem, they should be solving it in the exact same manner. In other words, there should literally be no difference whether Sarkan is solving the problem or Krish is solving the problem, because we need to actually normalize the problem and the solution to that extent.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me if this question is at the 30,000 foot level. If it doesn't make sense, I can sort of rephrase
It
it.
does. It
But if
does.
it does make sense, what do you think?
Okay, I think I have two answers to this. It does make a lot of sense. And I think the two answers live together like a Schrodinger's cat. So the first answer is I'm recalling a comic strip from XKCD where like two dudes are talking about 14 competing standards, and then someone springs into the room and they say, you know what, I've now come up with the standards that one standard that's going to be above all standards, and this is going to be it. And then the next up we have
Right.
15 competing standards, right? So as much as engineering appears to be science, it's also a lot of art in the sense that it's created and interpreted, right? Therefore, there is a lot of value in the diversity of opinions, backgrounds, upbringings, values, emotions that a lot of people bring in to solving a problem. Yes, we do have standards around like semantics, vocabulary, and whatnot for, let's say, a REST API, or even different types of transports, like different types of solutions to building out APIs. But then there still is a problem that this API is going to address, that there is a need that someone's going to consume this API, and the experience around consuming that API can be drastically different depending on how you build it, still remaining in the same confines of the standards and the best practices, right? So I think
Right.
engineering is a combination of those standards and practices with experiences. And experiences are a very human thing. And what better than diversity that can help create an amazing experience that can cater to not only a limited, narrow-sighted version of consumers, but a far greater, set of people who are going to be looking at that API day to day and using them to innovate other things.
You know, let me add to that, right? So let's say there is a certain set of standards, like you mentioned. We agree on, the things that linters can catch and deal with today, right? So
Mm-hmm.
you don't have to worry about all of those things. Uh, when you're looking at code, there is a sense that things have to look so similar to each other, so it becomes easy to maintain, manage, extend, yada yada yada. And now it's hard to argue that that is not the case. But with that said, I've seen that sometimes teams go to extreme lengths to making that happen, and it's never going to be a scalable model. Here is why, at least in
Mm-hmm.
my opinion. You can define the design and the structure and the foundational elements of how you want to approach and solve a problem. That should be the team should be in reasonable agreement, so you don't deviate from those. But the inner workings of how you're implementing these methods or functions or classes, you need a sense of developer freedom to it for more than one reason. One of the reasons is you only enjoy doing that work as a developer if you have that element of developer freedom. That's for starters. At least if I speak about
Mm-hmm.
myself, if I don't have that freedom, I'm not going to be enjoying what I'm doing, right? So that is important. But two, it's also important because if sometimes I've seen these design patterns where a pattern has been established, we quickly jumping off of I don't want to get into the technicality of the conversation, but when you talk to an engineer, unfortunately or fortunately, it happens faster than you
Mm-hmm.
expect. So I didn't expect to get into this in the 25th minute, but it is what it is. So let's say you get into a design pattern, you start mimicking those design patterns, right? And those design patterns may have been established by somebody at a certain point of time for a certain reason, which may or may not be applicable today at this time, or maybe for this particular problem. Here, that's to me the downside of just sometimes quote unquote blindly following a design pattern, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there is value in those separations because hey, Krish wrote this code a certain way for a certain reason. That doesn't mean that Serkan's going to have to write another API, another endpoint that kind of mimics it, even if they're part of the same team, because you're going to want to constantly question not just authority, question anything anybody has done within the realm of being reasonable, right? I'm not saying be
Mm-hmm.
unreasonable about it. I'm saying in a reasonable manner, so you can constantly improve upon this. And I give this long-winded example because there is seems to me in my mind or in people's minds a little bit of a conflict where some people want to go to great lengths to avoid any form of disagreement or conflict. But now when
Mm-hmm.
you're working with people from different parts of the world, coming from different backgrounds, there are going to be differences of opinions. And it's very, I think it's healthy to have these differences and sort them out, and do the best that you can for the company, for the organization, and for the team. This is a slightly different from my previous question, but how do you recommend we do that? Let's say the two of us live in two different parts of the world. We have common
Hmm.
interests. We are engineers. We want to solve the problems the best we both can. Yet there are going to be different approaches we take to solving those problems, and it's good to have, in my mind, those disagreements. How do we, in your experience, Erkan, given your experience of working with people in different parts of the world as well, how do you, can you speak a little bit to a problem, if you can think of even a generic
Hmm.
problem or a manufactured one, where you've seen people approach it completely differently, and you've like sort of thought about it, and you're like, yeah, you know what,
Hmm.
maybe this is not a bad idea, or maybe it is a terrible idea. And how do you wade through those challenges to
Hmm.
bringing people on board, and making them either agree with your thought process, or you bringing yourself to agreeing with their thought processes?
Again, I think that's an amazing question that kind of resonates with so many conversations I had in the past, as you know, one party in a conversation, or kind of like someone who helps mediate. And I think without exception, every single time, the way out of those disagreements have been taking a step back to align on what we're trying to do rather than how we're trying to do it. Because once everyone remembers why we're discussing this, why we're having this heated discussion about like whether we should use spaces or tabs, for instance, use semicolons or not, or whatever higher level conversation, are we there in that room, in that conversation, to get our opinion accepted or get a problem solved for someone? Are we trying to send a spaceship, a rocket to space? Are we trying to build a vending machine so that people can take their food without the machine getting stuck? Are we trying to build a car that will drive itself? Are we trying to, I don't know, build a UI where people are going to be able to make payments? So as long as we align on what we are trying to do, then our position and the depth at which we're kind of sticking our heels to the ground kind of loosen a little bit. Like that argument, that strong opinion gradually loses its weight and strength. We can then say, okay, you know what? How important is this opinion I'm holding so tightly uh, towards that thing I'm trying to do? Am I really aligned with the outcome, or am I more aligned with my opinions, right? And when you ask that question like so, and openly and directly, most people, if not all, respond to it rather positively, right? And then, yes, there are some people who, at that point, realize that their allegiance is with their opinions, which is also fine. It means that maybe it's not the right team to work with. And then this person might seek out a different type of career, a different type of problem, or a different type group of people to work with, that better aligns with what makes this person happier and more content in their job. But if this person is really aligned with the problem and in love with that problem, in love with solving that problem, uh, then I think the matter at which we solve the problem becomes less important, as long as the ideas are compared against each other with that in mind. One will ultimately emerge much more easily.
Okay, so beautifully said. Let me extend it a tiny bit, and
Mhm.
extend that example. Now, Sarkan and Krish are in the room here. You mentioned semicolons. I'll give you examples of flower brackets and not using
Mhm.
flower brackets and if statements, because there are languages that mandated. You don't need to
Mhm.
use it. I wish, some of these languages, they went even further, so we don't have to have those disagreements, that even if you wanted to have those disagreements, but
Mhm.
unfortunately they give you this flexibility, and then they make you decide and fight with each other. Maybe the language, it's like evil, it tries to want to have fun at the expense of two people arguing about itself. It's like self-centered, if you will. But let's say if I know, if let's say Serkan and Krish have a conversation about something, and you believe that there should be that flower bracket, and maybe I think it shouldn't be. It's a silly example, but I'm going to take that. Even if I feel strongly about the fact that it should or shouldn't be there, and I think differently from what you're saying, it's I think tell me if you disagree. I think it's in my mind it's fair to say that I might let that slide if I actually like Sarkhan as a person. I'm
Hmm.
going to now make this choice, not just between, you mentioned two things: is your allegiance to the problem or to your opinions. I'm wondering, I want to add one more to that mix. Allegiance could be to the relationship as well, right? There's a third
Hmm.
facet, at least as I see it. Now it's sure we want to solve the problem the best way possible, but we don't agree on how we want to approach that problem. But I don't want to like disappoint, if it's not important enough, right? If this is not important enough where both
Hmm.
solutions could work just as well, right? I'm like, you know what, I have to pick my battle. And I'm like, okay, I don't want to piss Sarkhan off, and I think he has a valid point, and I like Sarkhan. I'm just going to go with it, even though I may not agree. Now, if I did not like Sarkhan, which seems impossible, but I'm going to make it hypothetical. If I did not like Sarkhan, I'm going to be like, no, I'm not going to let this slide. I'm going to make a point. I'm going to actually take this as an opportunity to make a point, even though I actually don't even have strong allegiance to that flower bracket or not the flower bracket, right? That brings to the next aspect of the thing I want to ask you: relationships,
Hmm.
professional relationships at work. How If I ask how important it is, it's a very leading question, but I'm going to still start there. What do you think? Do you What are your thoughts on what I've just said, sir? And do you think if a relationship was at a point where I'm able to let things slide, it's easier than otherwise? And if so, is it important to create those professional slash personal relationships before we get into that meeting and have
Hmm.
this conversation or debate about a very engineering topic? What are your thoughts there?
Okay, so let me start by saying that the best thing I did for myself to grow, to improve as a manager, particularly as a people manager, was starting regular therapy sessions, like with my therapist for myself,
Right.
right? Take a deep dive into my mental state, take a deep dive into who I am, take a deep dive into how I respond to situations, right? When I start from that, it becomes much easier for me to have and build empathy for those things that are happening around me, starting from my direct relationships, but also towards those relationships that the people I support have with each other. Yeah? Now, I wanted to start with this because I think a lot of the workplace issues and personal differences come from the fact that there is a lot of diversity in terms of culture, in terms of age and maturity. Not necessarily they're about the same things, by the way. Let's say maturity. Let's not say age. And a lot of differences come from um, opinions in more personal matters that may or may not be contentious. Uh, and these things bring lots of color to conversations, and I think they add up to the creativity of what to build. That said, they also bring in their own set of challenges, and therefore one needs to learn how to navigate them. And I think that might be one of the more critical roles of a manager in a team who would be able to detach themselves from the emotions of whatever is going on in a relationship, in a team, across multiple people, and bring in perspective and offer people that perspective so that they can also shift their position in the conversation to have a better view of the other people's. So I would rather say I personally disagree that one should make decisions based on who they are working with and what they are feeling towards that person. But again, still find the outcome around the ultimate cause because they're easier to justify, right? I mean, they're rock solid to justify with. It's indisputable. As long as everyone has aligned on the outcome, nobody's going to take you to square one and say, hey, wait, let's rediscuss the outcome again. Right? That's rarely going to happen. But when it comes to personal relationships and opinions of person and emotions of person, then different people are going to have different views, and that's natural, and that's how it's supposed to be, right? And then how do you align on something when every single relationship is unique? My relationship with you is unique, and like your relationship with someone else is unique. My relationship with that person is also unique. So there's little common ground there, like interests, shared goals, shared incentives, shared affection, strong emotions that we share, background that we empathize with. But nonetheless, they are all very personal and they're very unique. So I'd rather say, in that situation, keep the focus on what we're trying to do and try to have some people in the team in roles to support relationships so that the teams are more cohesive in their shared understanding. And sometimes it's not going to fit because there's a certain type of culture that is needed, and that doesn't allow room for a certain somebody to shine. But maybe there is another team where this person can shine, where this person, she or he, is going to be surrounded by like-minded people, and maybe the manager's role there, it would be to offer that as an option, for a winning outcome for everyone. So yeah, in short, I'd rather not rely on my personal feelings, emotions, and thoughts about a person, about a relationship. I'd rather keep it at the higher level, on the outcomes.
Okay, so that's interesting that you should say that. So it's a little bit different from what I was saying, but that's good.
Hmm.
Lends itself to the next question. It's just going to be a different question.
Hmm.
So you're saying that just because Krish you like me, do not agree with what I'm saying. I mean, I'm paraphrasing what you
Absolutely.
just said, but I'm saying,
Absolutely.
uh, right, because you're saying the outcome is more important because your allegiance should be to your organization, to the problem you're solving. So you liking me shouldn't make a difference. I couldn't agree more, right? I was just,
Hmm.
taking an example where sometimes, not every decision is life changing per se, right?
Hmm.
Some decisions are, it is not wrong either way. And we start
Hmm.
sticking to our opinions because for whatever reason we feel like we have to, our opinions have to come out as the winners for
Hmm.
no good reason. And like you rightly mentioned, with when you do the same thing again and again and again for long periods of time, you then realize that there are bigger problems and bigger fish to fry. I'm sorry, my sunshine is just hitting my
Oh,
face here. Thought I
you
sat
see,
in a good position.
I'm
Hopefully
on a
it's all
sailboat and I don't have sunshine. No.
this is uh, except I'm hopefully it's not awkward the sunshine, but that's fine. Yeah, I try to sit in the position, but it's slightly strange.
No, it's fine.
uh,
It's
but
perfect.
let me So, Serkan, basically, uh, the balance has to be drawn somehow, right? And I say this because I've been in lots of, as I've done this for a long time, much like yourself. You see situations where uh, sometimes there are strong, really strong opinions, and you can't make any changes to those opinions because people believe that what they are doing, and it's not with any ill intent, it's with genuine intent because they have only solved those problems those ways and they have not been exposed to the same problems differently. So
Hmm.
now you might have done this, you might have seen things fail, and in my mind, here is the approach I've taken. I've tried to make it as engineering as possible because that's the real problem we are solving, right? So I'm like, okay, wait, if you want to solve the problem that way, let's create a small solution. It doesn't have to be
Hmm.
rocket science. Let's create a one method, one class, one problem, one test, and see if this thing pans out. If it does pan out, if it does prove that the problem can be solved differently and better the way you might be suggesting it more so than mine, then that's a better way to go, right? Trying to make it
Hmm.
very quantifiable. In my mind, if it was 10 years ago, I would have told you this is a foolproof solution. This has to
Hmm.
work because we are quantifying everything. There is results, there's numbers don't cannot lie. So we go with the solution. But the older, I want to believe wiser, I'm not sure how wiser, but at least the older me now says that is not even a great solution, because when you try to do that, it almost tries to, it sometimes comes across as though you're trying to prove people wrong quantifiably, not subjectively, more
Mhm.
quantitatively. And if someone didn't take well to you proving them quote unquote wrong, even though that was not your intent subjectively, they actually are not going to take it any better if you prove them wrong quantitatively, because it's even worse, because that tells you beyond doubts that what you said did not work. Uh, but yet you're in precarious positions in companies and teams and projects where you're going to have to make these tough decisions.
Mhm.
I mean,
Mhm.
life is not meant to be necessarily easy. Engineering is not meant to be necessarily easy.
Mhm.
How, if I present it to you, and I'm going to make this question even harder than I think it already is, to be honest with you, presented it to you, and you have to wear two different hats in answering this question, if you will. One is as a manager who's
Mhm.
leading these two people, and I think there is a difference, because as somebody who's leading two people, you have an ulterior motive, which is a good motive, but it's still an ulterior motive, because you want to amicably solve this problem and move things forward, right? So you have to,
Mhm.
how would you do this as a manager, as somebody who's managing these two people who have these differences? How would you solve the same problem as somebody who's not a manager, but as somebody who's one of those two people? And now you
Mhm.
don't have the ulterior motive of moving things forward. You might have other motives which are good motives, right? But slightly different motives. If I brought the same problem to you, one as Serkan as a manager with a hat, and another as Serkan wearing this developer hat, how do you approach this problem? Would you approach them differently? If so, how do you approach it differently?
Okay. The younger me would have kind of, dug his heels on the ground and defend the position, right? There would be no way out of it other than my way. A slightly older version of me would have taken the quantifiable approach, kind of explaining to people, quote unquote, educating people that my way is the better way, right? And the even older Sarkhan, as of today, I'd I'd rather focus again on outcomes and how important that decision is towards that outcome. Ultimately, doing the same thing, maybe as you explained, but the motivation would be different. The motivation wouldn't be letting this one pass because it's not that important. It would be okay. Because it's not that important because I want to maintain this relationship with these people, but I would be more in the position of, okay, this is not that important a decision for the outcome. It's okay either way. Let's go with the other one. I'm fine. And I'm not going to make a deal out of it. I'm not going to feel anything. And out of that meeting, going to something else, or like digging into my IDE, I already have forgotten about the conversation. I already have decided there that the other solution was the one to be moving forward. Now, I really care about this because shifting that focus from the outcome to the person and to the relationship unlocks a dangerous potential of politics. And I've been burned so many times by office politics in the past, especially in the early 2000s era where, these corporate environments were all about like, digging your trenches, defending your position. It was more about whose idea wins than which idea wins, right? But now it's different. I think, especially in the last 10 to 15 years, with emerging startups, with venture money taking this big financial power and handing it over to people who are coming from a completely different background, with completely different ambitions, with completely different approaches, who never ever want to wear a tie and a suit, for instance. Like, I mean, just as an example, I think that representation of a culture shift is critical in my mind, and that does represent the focus on the ultimate ambition of what these people have been trying to do as founders, as people who are who have fallen in love with a problem, and they so direly want to solve that problem, right? So I
Right.
think when the entire idea of that company, that team, is about solving a problem, they are bound to surround themselves with like-minded people, right? And as long as they manage to do that, they take good care about who they are bringing in to their team, then I think this is not going to be an issue. So whenever this is an issue, I think it's either bad hiring, like bad hiring in the sense that it's not a right culture fit, right? It's not that this person is bad, it's just not a fit. Or bad team placement. The person fits with the culture of the company, but doesn't really fit with the approach a certain team takes because of the certain characteristics of their particular problem, right? So I'd rather remove the personal aspects again as much as I can. But yes, I am human. I'm prone to my emotions, right? I fall victim to so many dark feelings, so many dark thoughts that are far from reality, but I get consumed by them every once in a while, and it still happens. Even this past few months, I did have to navigate quite stressful and challenging decisions in my own current role, and I did fall victim to my emotions and made some bad judgments. But what I did was, out with all the learning I had in my life, in my professional life, at least, I was able to take a step back, breathe, come back to the conversation an hour later, a day later, and actively try to correct that position, right? That rather than have it sit
Right.
like so, I went ahead and say, hey, you know what, hey guys, I made a mistake. I wasn't in my best state of mind. I was stressed, and I wasn't right. Can we take this conversation from the beginning again for a quick few minutes, right? I actively do that now.
Absolutely. Right.
Hmm?
And uh, the thing is, just to add to again one more time to what you're saying there, Serkan, is uh, when you do it, let's say again, a lot of this comes by experience, right? You can read as much as you want in a book, you can get all the degrees that you want.
Hmm?
I've personally been in college, I was in college for about 7.5 years, right?
Hmm?
But a lot of the learning actually I enjoy. I enjoy going to college. I don't know, now that I think about it in hindsight, I'm not a book person, but
Hmm?
maybe I was at the time, I'm not sure, but I did enjoy going to college. But my true learning, uh, no offense to anybody, but my true learning started when I started working, the first day of my
Hmm?
work. I'm sure I might have learned other things that implicitly have shaped me, things I learned in college. But more pragmatically, I think the first day of work, I still remember my first day of work in Ohio. Uh, and I still, am connected to the folks who had hired me, who could have hired just about anybody else, but they chose to hire me thanks to them. I don't know why, but but they did. But thanks to them. But you start learning, and you see how things are different from what you may have learned at school and college, from a book, whatnot, right? Things tend to be sometimes quite different in the real world. But you don't learn about people. I
Hmm?
did not go to college. I did a couple of courses on psychology, just part of my curriculum. But it was a lot of the work was heavily engineering focused, if you will. Right?
Hmm?
You only get to learn about people after you get into the real workforce, at least for the most part, right? For a lot of us. And then you work with people who are located in the part of the world you're in, and now things have changed. A lot of the work happens to be remote. So everything that we've even discussed thus far, if we took two examples, one, all of these challenges, everything that you mentioned and you spoke to in a not remote world, and then everything that you discussed and you've spoken to in a remote world, at the
Hmm?
super high level, at the 30,000 foot or the 60,000 foot, like a Concord level, are there some fundamental differences in how you'd approach the exact same problem with the exact same people in the exact same company, in the exact same team, working on the exact same technologies,
Yeah.
simply because you're not co-located? Or does that not make much, if any, difference?
It's drastically different, in my opinion, and in my experience. Not just opinion, it is drastically different. I mean, we are humans, right? We rely on social cues, mimics, expressions, body language, sometimes even more than we take cues from actual words spoken, right? And we have whole art forms like music, like theater, like poetry that builds on top of that very notion of words being interpreted differently, depending on how you say that or how your body language speaks while you're saying the same thing in the exact same manner. How you make a wink, how you roll your eye, how you raise an eyebrow, how you lift a hand, a finger, like all of these things have probably far greater value in delivering meaning than the particular choice of words. On top of that, there's written communication. Like there's a lot of written communication going on places like GitHub issues, PR reviews, code itself, comments, chats on Slack, whatever tracker you're using, like Linear, Jira, whatever, like all of those things contain a lot of communication, and the meaning that and the meaning and message we want to convey and its delivery suffers from this lack of bodily, gesturally context that is just simply unavailable. Even in the video, it's still unavailable. For instance, I cannot see how you're sitting right now. I mean, I do have an idea because I know you. We've worked
Right.
closely together for quite a while, but I cannot easily tell from your posture, from this video, whether or not you're relaxed or you're a little bit stressed, right? I don't know about that. But had we been sitting in the same room, I could just as well offer you a cup of coffee and say, hey, Krish, relax a little bit. Come on, now let's take a pause and then come back to this, right? Or I could say, hey, Krish, you should take this more seriously. I see that you're a little bit too relaxed for this problem. Let me explain
Right.
why I feel this way, right? All of that context is missing. So I think the fundamental difference there is that remote works requires lots of intention, particularly in the communication, right? We have to intentionally communicate, intentionally over communicate, intentionally review how we're communicating, intentionally ensure how it's received, intentionally ensure how it's received is indeed how it's received. Like there's a lot that needs to happen in the remote world. And I don't say it necessarily as a bad thing because, hey, I mean, I've been working remotely for over 10 years now, and I love it. I prefer that. But I would never ever prescribe that as a solution to how work should be done. Neither I would prescribe co-located because I think it's a matter of preference, it's a matter of culture, it's a matter of like-minded people coming together, bringing in their own diverse cultures to build on top of that creativity. Yeah, so it's drastically different.
You know, I couldn't agree more. And I want to call out for a conversation I had with another guest, Valentina Turner. I highly recommend people to check out that podcast. Valentina had some brilliant points as somebody who specializes in the field of, remote work.
Mm-hmm.
And goes to conferences, and that's Valentina's expertise. I'll include the link here. You should check it out. And
Mm-hmm.
spoken
Definitely.
to a lot to what you mentioned here as well, Serkan, which is one of the points that Valentina mentioned was knowing people at a more personal level, right? Knowing, hey, Serkan, how are things going, and having those little bit of those conversations before we get into the crux of what we're doing. Because in a world where we're meeting quarters and deadlines and KPIs and OKRs and yada yada yada, you
Mm-hmm.
tend to forget that there is, sure, you're working for a company, an organization that's for profit, not for profit, doesn't matter. There's an objective that you want to meet, but it does not, in my opinion, mean in a 60-minute meeting, if you only spoke the content of what that meeting was all about for 60 minutes, it does not make you any more productive than
Mm-hmm.
having a 10-minute conversation about knowing each other and actually being a lot more productive in the next 15 minutes, because it's not just the amount of time you talk about solving a problem that goes to the extent of how good that problem is being solved. It's how well your true intent is, and how you do it collectively as a team. That's sometimes forgotten. I want to emphasize this, at least for people who are either getting into this workforce in engineering or any workforce or switching careers. You might sometimes find yourself in a position in a team, and if it works for you, great, right? If it doesn't, uh, I can speak to it again from experience, where you feel like this is extremely stressful. I'm not actually enjoying what I'm doing. I mean, is this what engineering is all about? Is this what coding and development and deployment and functionality and DevOps is all about? There's a very simple answer to this question. No, it's not. No, it's not. Every single thing is absolutely beautiful. It's beautiful. If it had a face,
Mhm.
it would have a beautiful face. It had a voice, it would have a beautiful voice.
Mhm.
DevOps is great. Platform engineering is great. Development is great. Testing is great. Product management is awesome. Project management is
Mhm.
awesome. Scrum is awesome. I'm not saying this for the sake of saying it. Every single role is great. The only difference is, are you going to enjoy each and every one of those roles at the same level? That simple answer for
Mhm.
that too is absolutely not, right? If you
Nope.
take me and put me in a different position in a software company, as a startup, I do a lot of these roles, and I can speak to it from personal professional experience. I do different things on a weekly basis. Some things I truly enjoy, some not so much. But when you're a
Mhm.
startup, you don't have a choice, right? You have to do what you like and what you don't like as much. You just find a balance. There are times, like days go by, where I don't, in the last 2 weeks or so, where I've not had the chance to write as much code as I would write on an average week. And I'm starting to feel it, right? It's almost like a person in my family who is here, they've gone on vacation or something. I'm waiting for them to come back. That's the exact same feeling I have. I'm like, okay, where is this code that I'm missing so badly? And I told myself for the next 4 days, I want to do nothing else but just me and my editor,
Mhm.
because you
Mhm.
find those comfort zones. So you know what you truly enjoy, but you also know what you have to do. But if you're
Mhm.
not, but if you're working in larger organizations or even small organizations where somebody's, it's not your own startup, you have a certain role. You're expected to do that 8 hours a day, 10 hours a day, 40 hours a week, 50 hours a week. uh, you might feel that exhaustion. How we
Mhm.
get ourselves out of those periods of exhaustion, it's completely up to us, right? I want to have
Mhm.
this conversation with you, Serkan, where we touched upon mental health before we started this recording. Remember, one of the
Mhm.
topics,
Yes.
and I know somebody who feels very strongly about it. I want to give a shout out to Vidhi Ora, who I've done more than one podcast with at this point, and we continue to have this
Mhm.
conversation. My hope is to bring you, Vidhi, and I together into a conversation. I
Absolutely.
have to figure out the time zone challenges.
Mhm.
Vidhi
Yes.
lives in Delhi, different time
Mhm.
zone. You live in Turkey. I live on the east coast of the US. Part of the remote work challenges, but
Mhm.
remote work also gives us the opportunity for Vidhi in Delhi, for Serkan in Turkey, and Krish in Washington D.C. to actually have this conversation. So I don't want people to forget that remote work has its challenges, but if not for remote work, how are these three people going to be able to have these conversations? So we have to take
Mhm.
sort of the good with the bad, right?
Yes.
Uh, we've talked a lot of engineering. The items that I want to talk about, I had a feeling, given how not so succinct I am, and yeah, you're not going to be surprised, but people who know me are not going to be surprised. I want to talk about your career, starting from being a founder to becoming a freelancer to becoming a full-time employee. But that to me uh, is a deep conversation that's going to take I need the whole hour for it, if not longer. So
Mhm.
I'm going to keep that as a teaser for the
Mhm.
conversations that are coming. Again, like I've told people, my only aim is, I set a pretty low bar for myself. Krish, do a fair enough job, keep it interesting enough so people are not bored during the 1 hour that they're there in this conversation, though they have an incentive to coming back. And
Mhm.
I hope I try my best to do that. Not to say that I'm going to make that happen all the time, but that's the idea, right? To have these
Mhm.
conversations, because I know for what I want to talk about, there is no way I can do that in 1 hour. It's
Mhm.
absolutely impossible, given the richness of the backgrounds of the folks I'm actually having conversations with. And you mentioned we could talk about Turkish
Mhm.
food. I would love to talk about Turkish food
Oh.
for the whole hour. And I would be selfish and talk about vegetarian Turkish food. just because I'm selfish.
Definitely,
Sorry,
definitely.
to understand more about the vegetarian part of the turkey, which I know is,
Mhm,
is, is going to be lovely as well.
mhm,
So we talked a number of topics. We talked remote work, just to recap. We talked, conflicts and challenges and how to address them. You spoke to it as a manager. I want to talk about also work that you do to the extent you're able to share it. You about the differences between working with teams that are located, say, geographically dispersed versus that
mhm,
teams that
mhm,
may or may not be geographically dispersed. I want to touch
mhm,
upon those experiences as well, because sometimes I work on projects where everybody is located in the US. We are solving a problem. Other times I work on projects where not everybody is located here. And even though the problems might be similar, Sarkan, as you can imagine, how we approach those problems ends up being quite different from each other, right? Uh, your takeaway from the last 60 minutes of our conversation, your ideas, your thoughts as to how we could possibly even take these conversations forward, and
mhm,
plus your closing comments, and what would you recommend to people, and assume that the people watching this are not just developers. It used to be just developers when I did these solo podcasts, but thankfully
mhm,
now, given the breadth of conversations I've had the privilege of having with folks such as yourself, it's more than the dev people, more than the coders, more than people who are just in that in the tiny part of the software company. It's also a broader group of people. Uh, what is some advice you might give to people, so they have a happier, a positive, successful software engineering
mhm.
career?
Oh, it's tough. But thank you for asking. I mean, it's humbling and honoring to be asked such a question. I would say apply opinions on the circumstances. Not take opinions and learnings as they live in our heads, in their heads, but kind of apply them to what's going on at a particular situation. I think it, and we talked extensively on opinions, by the way. But I think if I would take anything as a learning from my entire career, I would take that, because we learn a lot, and any of those learnings and opinions don't even carry any weight at all alone. They do carry a lot of weight when applied to a particular situation, right? So a lot of things are indeed situational. So keep that in mind. I think is a good start, and just being open-minded about everything would complement that really well. And that would, I think, lay out an amazing foundation for a great, fulfilling career. And then give it time. Right? I mean, time flies by. A lot of people think they got just a few years to make it big, but hey, I mean, life is long and beautiful. Hopefully long. And hopefully beautiful, but expect that it will be, and then make the best out of it. I think all of the learning and the growth and the wins are just going to come along.
Okay, beautifully said. One last question. Why should I choose engineering or software development as a career? Like, if for people watching this, you're trying to make some decisions, maybe they've started doing this, maybe they're planning to do it, maybe they're a little unsure even after they've started doing it. What are some reasons in your mind? Why would you recommend that somebody become a part of a software engineering team and choose this as a career? And why would you recommend that they actually might be better off not choosing this as a career?
Mhm. I think anyone should consider software and engineering as a career if they want a shortcut to making impact in the world, making visible impact. I mean, look around us. Almost everything contains some level of software engineering in it, right? And all of those things make life easier in different ways, and sometimes make life meaningful in different ways. So I would definitely say if there is that kind of passion to make impact in the world, then I think it definitely is a, a great career to look into. Now, obviously, on top of that, there are a lot of skills that need to either exist, as nature, or need to be acquired as nurture. So maybe the make or break decision there would be the this person's willingness to get into a lifetime of learning, right? And lots of frustrations along the way. And if they are more engaging than limiting, then I would say definitely choose this career. Otherwise, look for other ways to make big impact in the world.
Wonderful. Serkan, I think there's a lot to talk about. And I know, knowing you, even at a personal level, uh, I have so many topics in my mind. And I know uh, I could take the next 5 hours and we could have this conversation, right? My biggest challenge with podcasting, collaborative podcasting that I'm super enjoying, is the fact that it actually comes to a close at the end of the hour, end of the 45th
Hmm.
minute or the 90th minute.
Hmm.
Uh, Maybe I'm going to challenge myself and convince somebody to have like a session. Let's just talk for 4 hours or something, because sometimes I feel like I'm not ready for the conversation to end.
Hmm.
This is no different, but thank you so much. My
Hmm.
hope is we'll have several of these conversations talking about a variety of different topics in the space of engineering, but also in the space of humans, and
Hmm.
as people who are building software. It's not just we are not yet, right? I mean, we are in 2024, so bots do a fair bit of the work going forward. So I want to have a conversation with you about the natural thing to have a
Hmm.
conversation about, right? What is a conversation in
Yep.
2024 without generative AI making its presence somewhere
Hmm.
in the conversation? Even if the last 60 minutes, sometimes, it's come to a point when AI, as I close this podcast, folks, where you have to say that word for anything to get picked up. Unfortunately, it's almost like you talk for an hour about Turkish food or Indian food, and then you
Hmm.
end this podcast just saying the word AI, so somebody picks it up somewhere, unfortunately, right? Even though it has no reference or bearing to the rest of the conversation. So I want to have these conversations about AI and the word and the usages that we actually see online, where things have very little to do with it, but you see it pop up everywhere because it's
Hmm.
a cool thing for it to pop up, even if you're not actually using it, genuinely to that extent that you're claiming to have used
Hmm.
it. But that's a different topic altogether. I want to say thank you, Serkan,
Thank you.
for taking time. Serkan Durusoy, who lives in Turkey, is a wonderful engineer and manager. I'm going to include links and any links that you want me to include, so folks
Hmm.
can connect with you, reach out to you.
Hmm.
More than happy to include that in the podcast. Folks, hope you enjoyed this conversation, as much as I did, and learned from somebody who there is plenty to learn from. With that said,
So
I'm going to say until next time, Sarkam. Thank you.
thank you. Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.